All right, let's go ahead and get started. And if people join us while we're going, that is a-okay. So thank you all for being here today. And it's great to get to meet you all through the chat. We're really excited about this opportunity for our next TPM Co pilot. My name is Nikki Da Silva. For those of you who I haven't met before, it's nice to be acquainted with you. For those I have met before, it's good to see some familiar names and faces on here. I serve as Director of Programs and Policy for the Chamber Foundation and work primarily on talent pipeline management. So my job is to hopefully be your cruise director, cruise guide on this journey, and get to tell you a little bit about TPM as a program and an initiative, kind of why we started it, and then about TPM CoLab, obviously, which is why many of you are here today. So we'll go through a little background on TPM, a bit on TPM CoLab, what the experience in the pilot will look like, as well as how to apply and the selection process. And then we'll leave some time at the end for questions. Does that sound good for everyone? I'm not seeing any questions or anybody unmuting themselves, so I will take that as an a-okay to keep moving forward. Okay, so a little background on TPM. So talent pipeline management was created back in 2014 as part of a white paper, and really this theory and understanding of how traditional supply chain management, that process of having an end customer provide information on a specific product or need that they have, and having raw materials going through a process in which at each point of that process there's value being added to meet that end customer specifications. And it's not that we're necessarily likening students or workers to widgets, but recognizing there's some value in having employers being able to really communicate well with their training, education and training partners and community partners back to workers and learners about what their needs are, what are the most in-demand or critical jobs that they have, what are the skills and competencies that somebody needs to be successful in that role, and really being able to build a sustainable end-to-end talent pipeline. So we're really looking at how we can kind of address some of those communication gaps and building that common language and a clear way to communicate between employers and their talent partners, particularly as we shift to a more skills-based hiring process, which allows employers to hire for potential, not just based on what we're kind of putting out there as a proxy to get the people that we are looking for. In a traditional sense, we typically teach TPM or talent pipeline management through what we call our TPM Academy. And we've done we have now 20 cohorts. We'll be launching 2 more cohorts here in the fall across 40 states with over 500 practitioners who have graduated from those academies and more than 2,500 employers who are engaged across the US and Canada. We have a few partners in Canada, and we're always looking to engage more. So that's a very general overview of kind of TPM, where it came from, what we're trying to accomplish with TPM, and how we kind of set up the framework around those traditional supply chain management principles and making it really authentically employer-led to create shared value and accountability across the supply chain. So the framework itself is consistent of 6 strategies plus an orientation. And within each one of those components, we're really looking at addressing one particular question. So in strategy 1, this is really trying to build a focus for the employers and understanding what pain point will the employer collaborative address, what is kind of keeping them up at night, and how can we organize within our community for that collaboration and leadership. In strategy 2, this is understanding what the most critical jobs are and the demand for it. Strategy 3, employers are looking at what skills and credentials, really those hiring requirements, are of the highest priority for them for those critical jobs. In strategy 4, it's looking at where does our talent, where does the best talent come from for these critical jobs currently, And are there untapped sources of talent that these employers could be partnering with? Really thinking about how are we including a broad spectrum of potential talent that's typically kind of left behind or left on the table when we're using more traditional workforce strategies. Strategy 5 is really when you're starting to co-design those pathways and build those talent supply chains, and looking at what are the performance metrics that are most important to the partners within that collaborative, and who will be the preferred providers of talent that the employer collaborative will be working on to build these solutions. And then finally, with strategy 6, it's all about thinking about where there are opportunities for improvement. And no surprise to anyone here, COVID uncovered another component of workforce strategies that we really have to be more intentional about, and ensuring that we're building resiliency into our pipelines. What do we do when there's a big disruption? So those are kind of the core components of the talent pipeline management framework, which is typically encompassed in our TPM academies that we've been doing in an in-person setting for the last 5+ years. But one of the things that has come up is a couple of problems or challenges that we've been faced with. The first is that the demand for this program has really outpaced our current capacity. Typically, we'll do anywhere from 3 to 5 cohorts a year. However, we always have more people than we can put into an academy requesting access to this training. And our ability to reach a larger market is really constrained under this current business model. Imagine if you're not able to attend a specific set of classes because of the schedule or the timeline that's set out. You might then be waiting 6 months, a year, whatever it might be, in order to participate again, or realistically not being able to take the time away from your family life, your work life, in order to participate this in a in-person fashion. And then finally, our practitioners, the graduates of the TPM Academy, have really found this to be a value add to the work that they're doing in their communities, and really impactful. And practitioners want their training and skill set to be recognized professionally. So how do we turn this into a professional program that can actually be recognized with a digital badge and a certification opportunity through peer review? So to address that is why we created TPM Co. So TPM Co is meant to be kind of the online learning platform that will train and credential all of our TPM Academy practitioners, or those seeking to become familiar in the framework, and allow them to also have the opportunity to connect with their peers in an online community and really learn and grow together. So what we're trying to do at this point in time is really test out, have we met the mark? And so this is an opportunity to get to go through the TPM Academy training through this new platform and really learn, really get to learn the framework in this new style, and provide us with really valuable feedback on whether or not there are better opportunities for us to build this in a way that's going to create the best experience for all learners. So any questions on anything I've covered so far? I know I just talked at you for about 10 minutes. All right, seeing none, I will keep trucking along. So what is TPM Co? What does it look like? What does this mean for you? And kind of how is it different from a traditional academy? So what you see on the screen right now are a few kind of screen grabs from some of our e-learning units. So in our more traditional academies, we're very focused on the host organization, those people who would be playing more of a intermediary, workforce intermediary, maybe a chamber of commerce, a business or industry association guiding role for a group of employers. In this format, we're very audience specific. So we have tracks or learning pathways for those who would be playing that host organization role. If you're coming from an employer perspective, say you're going to be part of an employer collaborative, or you're an individual employer who wants to learn how to utilize this framework internally. Or third, you're a provider of talent, so an education and training provider a community organization that's providing wraparound supports to workers and learners, and are part of a talent supply chain. We really want to make sure that everybody that's involved has an opportunity to learn the framework and understand their roles, so that they can work collaboratively for that shared value we talked about earlier. So very audience specific. The other component of this is that in a traditional academy, you're typically learning the content of the framework in those academy trainings, right? Whereas in this version, you would be doing all of that learning of the framework asynchronously self-paced. So you'd be learning the theory through the e-learning modules, which you see examples on the screen. And then you'll be applying that if you choose to participate in any of the live lessons. So it's less lecture, more discussion style, more opportunity to connect with your peers in those live sessions, as well as peer-to-peer learning and connections through the online community. So a series of forums, instant messaging, all different types of components in a kind of one-stop shop to be able to connect with other people who are doing this work across North America. And then, of course, the final component of this is kind of that recognition of the learning through digital badges, certificates, and the peer review. One other thing I just want to point out, since we're on this screen right now too, is I think, and hopefully many of you would feel the same way, it's a little bit more engaging when you have audio, video, different visuals and interactions that you're clicking through with the content versus reading a book. So that's something that we've been really intentional about building into these e-learning modules, and are looking for people to kind of give us feedback on have we met the mark there, or if there are other things that would help it be even more engaging and connect to the learning. So the next thing I'm going to walk you through is just very briefly what the learning journey looks like in TPM CoLab. So once you enter in to the platform, you'll enter to a dashboard, which will provide you with kind of an overview of all the different components of it, including your learning opportunities that you see on the left-hand side, where you might be within a particular strategy or module there in the center. If you're signed up for a virtual instructor-led training course, you would see that as well as be able to see anyone from maybe your cohort or that you've added as a friend in the right-hand side of it, and any of the badges or resources that have been shared either by the Chamber Foundation or by your peers in the library. So just to break down the learning journey, as I mentioned, the majority of this is done through kind of the self-paced component for the actual learning of the framework itself. And so it's broken down into a series of components. And this is just a high-level example of the first strategy to give you a little bit of an insight into what it would be like. So you'd have your welcome or overview for the strategy. You'd have your e-learning units that you would do that are the specific core components or learning that meet the learning objectives for that strategy. There's an optional additional piece to this if you want to learn the TPM web tool, which is the additional resource that we've created that allows you to kind of automate some of the data collection and analysis components of the TPM framework, as well as some case studies and exercises for you to go through to kind of reinforce the learning that you have, a reflection section. And then at each point in your learning, there will be different assessments. So there will be kind of a quick 3-question check your knowledge quiz at the end of a unit. At the end of a strategy, it's a 10-question quiz. And then to kind of complete the entirety of your learning, we include what we call a summative assessment, which allows you to verify that you've gone through the program and that you've learned the core objectives of the framework, and then receive that digital badge for your learning. So if you were to participate in the synchronous component, you would have the additional virtual instructor-led training, which would include additional exercises. You would get to meet a TPM practitioner who's an expert in the field and learn from them about their experiences, and then get time to meet with your peers and reflect on what are some next action steps. Laura had a question in the chat. Will synchronous learners be able to work ahead on the self-paced study portion as time allows. Absolutely. As long as there are courses in the platform for you to complete, you're welcome to work at your own pace to do those ahead of time. In fact, I would encourage you to complete those ahead of time so that you can stay on track, particularly if you're in the synchronous section with the virtual live sessions that you'll do with your cohort. So great question. And then the third component of this learning is some of the other things that utilizing this learning management system allows you to do, which is being able to track your progress. So if you were to exit out of a screen, you can come back to it. It will save where you are in your learning, and you can continue to complete that. I mentioned the social learning, that online community piece. We'll have additional resources available for you outside of just the curriculum itself to help support your understanding or implementation of the framework. And then finally, we'll have check-in sessions throughout the training to make sure that everybody's able to kind of stay on track and that we're addressing any challenges that might come up through this. My goal is that this pilot is much less painful than the first pilot, although the participants in the first pilot might say that it wasn't that way at all. But recognize that we are still in pilot mode, which is part of why we're providing this learning opportunity for free and a stipend. That there might be a couple of hiccups along the way, but we'd rather get them out now than once we launch the public. So you're going to be part of the first group of people to ever see this in this format and have the most up-to-date content. And this is just a broader overview. If you take all of the different strategies together, what it would look like as your kind of high-level journey through this process. Any questions on the learning journey? The next thing we'll dive into will be the actual pilot program experience. Man, I am doing good today. All right. Oh, and I see that Jason Tishko has joined us. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself as a TPM Brain Trust? If you're available.
Oh, hello. Sorry, I'm a little bit late. Thank you everyone for joining. Really excited to get this second pilot up and off the ground, and really appreciate you all kind of being on the ground floor of this to help us get it right for all the future practitioners that will follow. So just wanted to say on behalf of the U.S. Chamber, thank you so much for not only everything you've done for us to date, but for going through this experience with us. We really appreciate it. And I won't take up any more time, Nikki. I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks for that, Jason. I didn't mean to put him on the spot, but it's always a great day when Jason is able to join us. Jason Tishko is really the author and creator, along with one of our colleagues, Bob Sheets, from the George Washington University, who really developed this framework and methodology. So let's go ahead and dive into the pilot itself, since I didn't see any questions come through the chat, and talk a little bit about the timeline. So applications are due June 26th, which gives you a couple of weeks from today to still complete those if you haven't already. We will notify all applicants by July 6th, whether or not you've been accepted. And then the program will kick off at the end of July. So that gives you a few weeks in between when you get notified to start to get organized in order to participate in this. So we'll do a kickoff with all of the cohorts together and walk through in detail more of how the platform works and what the expectations are at that time. And then we'll wrap up towards the end of September. So we'll have about 2 months together to walk through the TPM Academy in this virtual setting. Just curious, how many will be selected? That is a great question. So for each of the cohorts, which I'll break them down here in a minute, we're looking to have about 30 participants in each cohort. So 30 in cohort A, which is the asynchronous, 30 in cohort B, and then 15 to 30 in the opportunity populations extension module. Thank you for that question. For each cohort, we'll have a check-in session for you, and I've listed those here on the screen. I do see another question coming in. Alexis, do you need to complete your application at the time you start? So there is no ability to save your work once you start your submission. So my suggestion to you would be, if you feel like you might need additional time, just go ahead and look at what the questions are for the application and fill them out in a Word document. And then that way, when you're ready to submit, you have all of the components of the application ready to go. And it's just really a plug and chug situation. Absolutely. Yes, so then you'll have a check-in for each one of the cohorts. And so that will kind of help wrap up along with the feedback sheets, the virtual sessions if you're doing synchronous, and then the e-learning content that everybody will be doing. So let's talk a little bit about the different cohort options. So the first cohort that we have is our asynchronous cohort. So this is really for people who want to learn the TPM framework, but need maximum flexibility in when and how you learn. It's fully self-paced. That means you'll be individually motivated and have essentially 8 weeks to complete the content. There are 7 strategies, and each strategy is comprised of about 5 to 9 units. Very similar to the printed curriculum, if you've ever seen that before. And you'll complete those, as I mentioned, on your own time. You can expect that each strategy in total will take about 2 to 4 hours to complete. And as I mentioned, in addition to the e-learning modules, you'd participate in our kickoff meeting, 1 check-in during those 8 weeks, and a wrap-up meeting. You would also be asked to complete a feedback survey at 3 points throughout the training, just to make sure that we're collecting all of your experiences in a written format and can, take action on those to make this the best experience possible. And then, of course, as I had mentioned, we are also providing a modest stipend for each one of the cohorts, depending on which one you select. And I'll mention this again when we get to it, but if you choose to be in cohort A or B, say that you're a new learner or you're an existing practitioner, you can also apply to be in cohort C. But I'll talk about it when we get there, but in order to do cohort C, you have to either go through the academy at the same time or have already participated in the academy. So the second cohort is our synchronous cohort. This is the most involved one. I'll be very honest with you. It's the most involved, that sometimes it's where people say they find the most value, because they do get to connect with their peers while they're learning together in this. Laura asked, will cohort A and B earn the same certification? Yes. So everybody that goes through the TPM Academy, whether you're doing it in the traditional sense or you're doing it through TPM Collab, will all get a certificate of completion for their participation and verified knowledge of the TPM framework. That's kind of our standard level of kind of validation of your learning. Now, there will be additional tiers to that, as far as whether or not somebody wants to be go through the peer review process, and then they would be able to have this more professionalized sense of certification or validation for their actual ability to implement based on the framework versus just their knowledge of the framework. We're calling the certificate that you would get at the end of the e-learning an assessment-based certificate. There will be a digital badge version of that. We're looking at also potentially gamifying components of it, so there will be other badges and rewards throughout the learning, but those would be kind of probably the ones that you're asking about, Laura. Did that answer your question? All right. So for cohort B, this is the synchronous one. So you'll have both the e-learning self-paced components that we talked about for the synchronous cohort, but you'll also have your live instructor-led sessions, which we call VILTs. So you'll have at least one TPM faculty member as well as an additional TPM practitioner. They're kind of guiding you through some exercises to really think about how you would apply this in your community and discuss this with other peers who are doing the learning at the same time. So this is really great if you want that really personal experience where you're building connections along the way. But it does take, some more time commitment to participate in that. So there'd be the 7 e-learning modules. You'd have 7 corresponding virtual instructor-led sessions that last anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And then you would also have the wrap-up meeting, the kickoff meeting, and the feedback sheets. Laura was asking, will you be covering peer review process and time commitment later in the presentation? So the peer review process is not available as of yet. It will be available when we launch, but you have to have been a TPM practitioner for a certain amount of time to be eligible to apply for the peer review process. Okay, absolutely. All right, and last but certainly not least, this will be the first time ever that anybody will be engaging with our opportunity populations extension module content. So about 2 years ago now, we released our opportunity populations extension, really focusing on embedding DEI into talent strategies and into TPM work around back in 2020 we did this. And what we've done is we've kind of modified that and enhanced it to be able to be facilitated as an extension in the e-learning components to this TPM Academy experience. And our goal is to continue to do that with others. As we get additional interest or feedback from our practitioners about really focused areas that they want to become specialized in related to TPM and related to these other areas. And so this is kind of the first one that we'll be testing with all of you. So it's a much smaller kind of add-on, you might say. You can think of it as an elective course, if you will. And it's comprised of 5 units, as well as the kickoff and check-in meeting and 1 feedback sheet. So this would be asynchronous. You could participate in this if you are also participating in cohort A or B, or if you've already gone through the TPM Academy. Okay. And then, so once you've kind of determined which cohort you want to be in, so kind of what your learning style or pathway would be, the other thing to think about is which learner track. So I talked about in the beginning about how we're really being audience specific with the content. The framework stays the same, but how we're talking about the role that you might play within your talent supply chain, we really want to be focused in on ensuring that we're providing you with the best content and resources for the role that you would play. So you would determine whether or not you would be in the host organization track, the employer track, or the provider track. Any questions on those different tracks or how you might determine which one you would want to apply for? Okay. All right, and then I will briefly go through the application process. So the application, and I'm assuming all of you have seen it since you're on this webinar, is available on tpmacademy.org. You'll select your preferred cohort and track and then complete those general contact and information questions along with some short answer questions on the application. In addition to the application itself, what we're also asking is that you get a written statement of support, and there's a template available on the application page from either your CEO or board chair, if you're the CEO, that states that they're supporting your participation in this program. One other thing I wanted to mention is to make sure that you see a thank you screen before you close out the window of the application. Just if you don't see it at the top, make sure you scroll down and see that it has submitted your application. I would hate for you to think that you've completed it and maybe there was one thing missing and then it didn't actually submit. To Alexis's point earlier of we're not able to save the work. So we want to make sure that you get everything in the way that you intended it to. And then what I just included here on the side, it's also included on the application page, is kind of what are we looking for when we're thinking about the rubric. We want to kind of understand, your organization's position or your individual position to really improve or address some of your community skills gaps or workforce challenges, and that there's some understanding of the TPM methodology or kind of the concepts around what we're trying to achieve by utilizing this, both your feasibility to take action and the strength of your partnerships within your community to really start to do this type of work. So that is really all I have on my overview, but I wanted to see if there are any questions, and feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question, or you can pop it in the chat. Alec?
Yeah, hey Nikki, Alec with the Fuck Your Chamber. I just sent you a text. I've been working on the pilot, I guess the pilot page or the pilot program. I just want to make sure that that we were doing it correctly here versus just going to tpmacademy.org.
Yes, so tpmacademy.org is just kind of the cover URL for what you have there, the tpmacademy.us Chamber Foundation one. So they're the same thing. They'll take you to the same place.
Great, thanks.
Absolutely.
Nikki, I just have a
Go ahead.
question. Thank you so much for this session. Could you just give me a 1 or 2 sentence description of the difference between the different tracks, organization, employer, or provider? Thank you.
Yep. So a host organization, this is going to be someone, so I'll give you kind of the definition. So in TPM, we think about host organizations are the entities that are going to house or provide the staffing and management support for one or more employer collaboratives. So traditionally, host organizations would be your business serving organizations or intermediaries, whether that's a chamber of commerce, an economic development organization, an industry association, really those that kind of are business facing and can support the work of the employer collaborative. From the employer track, I hope this one's pretty self-explanatory, but really thinking about employers that are either going to be participating in an employer collaborative or want to learn the TPM framework to do this work internally, and really focused on it from that employer perspective. And then the provider track, this is basically, I like to say, it's basically everybody else, right? Whether you're an education and training provider, whether you're a community organization, a governmental agency, if you're providing any sort of education, workforce training, or talent services to employers, learners, or job seekers, you fit into that kind of provider track. This could be, a staffing agency, a high school, community college, all different types of entities kind of fit into this. But really, if you're in any way supporting the activities within a supply chain or within a career pathway, so to speak, and you don't fit into host organization or employer, it's likely that you would fit into that role. Is that helpful?
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Excellent.
Great. Jason, did I butcher that at all?
I had actually had to step away briefly, Nikki, so I didn't hear your full description. I'm sure you knocked it out of the park, but just to put a finer point on it, if I understand the question correctly, like how are we defining the 3 tracks? Host organizations for those entities that's going to convene 3 or more employers in a collaborative. You could pursue this as an individual employer, learning how to implement it on behalf of your company. And the third bucket is really a catch-all, but intended for folks more on the supply side. So if you're planning to be part of an employer's talent supply chain or be working with them, this is your opportunity to get to know everything that they're going through and how they're producing information and decisions, so you know how to effectively work with them and when.
Thank you. Vincent, I see you have a question about, are there any success stories for TPM? Absolutely, we have a ton of them, and I'm looking to Laura Coates if she can help me pop in our Forward on Talent link and maybe a couple examples. But we have close to 10 kind of formalized case studies, but if you tell me an industry or a region that you're interested in, I could probably find somebody that's working in that space and provide you an example.
Yeah. Nikki, I can give a quick anecdotal one, if it's helpful. You know, we had a company, a utility provider in Western Michigan go through this training. The challenge they had is they were posting 100 skilled trade jobs and getting something like 4,000 applications. Fewer than 50 of those 4,000 were qualified. They had very poor retention a year later after they invested a lot in onboarding and training. They learned the TPM framework, they implemented it, they identified 4 preferred providers, they posted 100 skilled trade positions, they got 100 highly qualified job applicants. A year later, they had 98% retention, and they saved on average $30,000 per hire. They've since then, last I checked, had hired over 300 positions using the framework. So that's just a single company, a larger utility company, about how they have benefited from implementing the framework. Now, of course, for us, the real benefit is streamlined opportunities for learners and workers to access employment or to advance in a career. But there is a very real return on investment that companies get by providing this kind of leadership through using the TPM framework. And then we give a variety of other success stories that are more around employer collaboratives and how other benefits have been derived for a lot of the education partners that are part of those talent supply chains. But that gives you a nice quick ROI example for how a company can actually materially benefit by using the framework.
And that particular company that Jason's speaking about, you know, one of the things that they recognize is after they did all this work and they saw all the success and that they were able to fill these positions by really aligning what their needs were with their education and training partners and really clearly communicating that, that they had still kind of missed the mark on one thing, one really important thing. They were still not getting the diverse talent that they were looking for, and they were not representative of the communities that they were working in. So what they're doing now is trying to think really intentionally about, you know, when I asked that question earlier about who is not at the table that should be when we're thinking about our untapped talent or talent providers, and being really intentional about how they're building out that talent and provider network, and building those pipelines and removing any barriers that people might have to even entering into that particular industry. Any other questions or comments from anyone? All right. Any closing words, Jason?
Just I'll play off what Alexis had put in the chat, that, you know, TPM was designed to be a value-added framework to really any kind of workforce or education partnership that may already be underway, and it's very complementary to industry sector partnerships. Think of TPM as kind of the playbook that helps employers get their house in order, so they can produce better, more effective primary source information about their critical needs, but then can actually use that to build actual talent supply chains that are going to provide employment opportunities for learners and workers. So it's plug and play with a lot of things, and you can make TPM kind of its own branded effort and kind of start from scratch, or you can use it as just a toolkit that could be applied to any existing employer partnership or sector partnership that may be out there. It's really how you choose to use the framework and how you want to communicate it to the community, but it's definitely can be added to things already underway. Just know that it moves those who are using the framework from an advisory role to an end customer role of the talent supply chain. So this gets down to actual talent pipeline building. So real jobs are at stake, but really encourage you to either use it as a standalone project, but if you already have partnerships underway that could benefit from the framework itself, feel free to apply it as just another tool in your toolbox, one that really helps tease out much more effective employer leadership.
Thanks, Jason. And if there aren't any other questions, I'll go ahead and give everyone back 20 minutes in their day. But I really appreciate you joining us for this. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll go ahead and pop my email in the chat for you. And the applications are available on the tpmacademy.org website until June 26th. So we look forward to having you participate in our pilot. And as I mentioned, let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, we are incredibly in your debt for even being interested in participating in this, but especially if you do. The feedback we've received so far from our previous pilot has been just overwhelmingly valuable to ensuring that we're doing this in the right way. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that it's a value add for all of you. And we can't do that without, your participation and support at this process. All right. Well, bye, everyone. Thank you so much.